Condoleezza Rice was the Secretary of State of the United States. She was the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States. And yet in our number 3 story tonight, it is sadly no longer surprising how much she can get wrong in the span of about 5 minutes, taking questions from university students. And oh, by the way, in the process, may have also admitted to a crime. The clip from this Monday is up on YouTube. We lack the time to set her straight on everything she got wrong, but the World Trade Center towers, they had 110 stories, madame, not 80. But we will take on 2 narratives she tried to advance from historic to present day. First, in justifying what she will not call torture, Ms. Rice appeared to suggest that Al-Qaeda was the greatest threat the United States of America has ever faced.
Even in World War II, as we faced Nazi Germany, probably the greatest threat that America has ever faced. Even then, we didn't.
With all due respect, Nazi Germany never attacked the homeland of the United States.
No, but they bombed our allies.
Just a second. 3,000 Americans died in the Twin Towers and in the Pentagon.
500,000 died in World War II.
No,
and yet we did not torture. We did not torture the prisoners of war.
And we didn't torture anybody here either.
Forget that Germany's ally did attack the homeland and that the Nazis overran Europe and much of Asia and had an unquestioned program to develop actual nuclear weapons and the intercontinental missiles that would drop them on this country, and were doing so as early as 1943. If the criteria for waterboarding is attack on the homeland, what then, Ms. Rice, of the Civil War, when Confederate troops attacked Maryland and Pennsylvania and Lincoln did not waterboard? What of the Revolutionary War, when British troops killed more than 3,000 Americans and Washington did not waterboard? What, Dr. Rice, of the War of 1812, when British troops burned much of Washington, D.C. to the ground and Madison did not waterboard? But Ms. Rice heard her case even more rhetorically by invoking kind of Nixonian defense, the one that went, if the president does it, it's not illegal, and legally by admitting, as Nixon's White House counsel will momentarily explain, to a crime in conveying Mr. Bush's authorization thereof.
Is waterboarding torture?
The president instructed us that nothing we would do would be outside of our obligations, legal obligations, under the Convention Against Torture. So that's, and by the way, I didn't authorize anything. I conveyed the authorization of the administration to the agency. And so, by definition, if it was authorized by the president, it did not violate our obligations under the Convention Against Torture.
Returning to our program once again, former Nixon White House counsel John Dean, also, of course, author of Broken Government and Worse Than Watergate. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you, Keith.
Can you explain what Dr. Rice just probably unintentionally admitted to there?
Well, it's quite surprising. She clearly admitted she's not an attorney because she wouldn't have made the statement she made. She tried to say she hadn't authorized anything. Then she proceeded to say that she had indeed passed orders along to the CIA to engage in torture if it was legal by the standard of the Department of Justice. This really puts her right in the middle of a common plan, as it's known in international law, or a conspiracy, as it's known in American law. And this indeed is a crime if it indeed happened the way we think it did happen.
Was this more the Nixon-Frost defense, or was she trying to say that President Bush only authorized methods that were already legal, and since that included waterboarding, therefore working backwards, waterboarding must have been legal?
Well, it's a little fuzzy what she was saying, and she was obviously trying to extricate herself and keep herself in a safe distance, that she was only operating under some general guidance of the president making things legal. So it's not clear whether this is a full-throated Nixonian-type defense, Keith, or whether it's a lot of confusion of the facts and just throwing things up there to try to protect herself.
Ultimately, though, I mean, Dr. Rice or Secretary Rumsfeld or Vice President Cheney or all of them singing as a barbershop trio could sit there and say, yes, we signed and we conveyed all kinds of authorizations regarding waterboarding. Does it matter at all if they have been put above the law by the subsequent president and the subsequent Congress?
Well, you know, it may not matter, as it turns out, in the United States, but I got to tell you, I think it is going to matter what they say and how they say it and when they say it abroad, because there are indeed investigations going on. We had news yesterday that Judge Garzón in Spain is indeed proceeding with an investigation and inquiry there. He's not announced any specific names, but he's certainly looking at these. These kinds of statements are going to come back and be very interesting to any investigator.
And I don't want to overstate this point or put too fine a point on it either, but if President Obama says waterboarding was torture, which is what he said at the news conference last night, there was no equivocation about that, is he not admitting now, in a sense, that he too is in violation of the Geneva Conventions and the obligations to investigate and prosecute torture? Because that's the part we never seem to remember about the Geneva Conventions. The second part says, if there is evidence of it in your country, you, the leaders of that country, are supposed to do something about it, at least in terms of an investigation.
That's very true, Keith, and indeed he is indeed in violation if the United States does not undertake investigation of this or ultimately prosecution if that's necessary. It's not only the Geneva Convention, the Convention Against Torture also requires this. There are no exceptions with torture. There are no real things like torture light. The world community, I think, is going to hold the United States responsible, and if we don't proceed, somebody is going to proceed.
John, you saw the president's answers on those questions about torture and waterboarding, and did the previous administration authorize it and engage in it, and did they break international law in doing so? He seemed to give all the elements out of which you would make a yes to that question without ever saying yes. Do you think there is a possibility he's doing this deliberately to hope that there is a greater groundswell for prosecution of this in this country? Or what was the nature of that kind of what certainly sounded like hair splitting from here?
Well, it is interesting. The New York Times poll just earlier this week came out that 62% of the American people do not think there should be investigations and prosecutions of torture. So there is not a broad public support for this this idea of proceeding anyway against these people. So that might well be what he's doing, and he clearly does want to avoid the political consequences of this and any blowback that occurs from any investigation he might undertake. So I think he's going slowly, which is appropriate, and he has given it to his Attorney General, who's going to make the ultimate decision.
John Dean, author of Worse Than Watergate and Broken Government, and always of great help in trying to understand this subject. Thank you, John. All the best.
Thank you, Keith.